Good morning. It's January 17th, and we are reading Pity by Avner Mandelman. I just want to talk a little bit about the setup. For those of you online, we can now see you on a big screen, but I cannot see all of you. I can only see part of you online. And so if you have a question, the best thing would be to raise your hand virtually. I will be able to see that. Put the question in the chat, or put in the chat, I have a question, or I have a comment, or whatever. My hand's up, whatever you would like, and I'll try to be switching and to see everybody, but it's that's one of the limitations. But I think for us here, the experience is much better. So I always like to start with to show you a little bit about our, and now everybody can see this. And there is Avner Mandelman. And he splits time between Paris, California, and Canada for the past 4 decades. He was born in Israel and served in the Israeli Air Force from 65 to 68. His stories have been widely published throughout Israel and North America, including in Best American Short Stories and the Pushcart Prize Anthology, and of course the book that we're reading. And I think just that little tidbit tells you a little bit and helps you as you're reading the book, because of all he's got a lot of Hebrew and Army, what's it called? Slang. But Janice has the first question.
It's first when I read that, I thought it was very depressing. But then, if any of you have read Daniel Silva,
oh yeah,
this reminds me very much of Daniel Silva, except in Daniel Silva books, it's always about the IDF and about Secret Service in Israel. It's always upbeat. They always get the bad guy. They never hurt anybody else. This was a bundled up mess. You never see that in David Silva book.
Right, and you don't see that on the news. You would never see that. It could happen in real. I believe it happens in real life all the time. But Alan, by the way, can you guys online hear us?
Yes, very well.
Answer, Alan.
Well, I just put it in the chat. I love when you said something about the Hebrew. I love the fact, contrary to most of the other authors we've read, he explains almost every Hebrew word or whatever, maybe they were Yiddish, but I think they were Hebrew, that we don't know, so that you don't really have to look it up. I read on a Kindle and I would start pressing the word and realize that the next phrase is his explanation. So that was great.
Right.
And I think you get to, the only other comment I have, I think you get to the point where I found this very humorous, although I don't think it's it's not a humorous subject, but I loved his writing style. I really enjoyed the story.
Yeah,
I agree. I thought it was a beautiful read. Not to rephrase that. I thought it was excellent writing, and I read through it in 2 minutes. I couldn't believe I was done. But his history gave him the gravitas to write this, and so I read it differently if I had not known, if I had not looked up and found out. So I felt it was a benefit to know his background.
okay. I don't know what. I watched the Today Show before I left, and Miss America is. She is still in the American Air Force, and she flies, jets. And I was like, wow.
Did they make her wear a bathing suit?
Well, she was not in a bathing suit. She was in a sleeveless dress with a crown on, but that's a story for another time. The other thing is, this short story, Pity, was adopted as a solo play, which I think would be super interesting.
Oh, wow.
As a reading in San Francisco. So Mary,
What was really helpful for me doing research was the amount from the author. Okay, for example, some of the, I think, picked up a quote from the Jerusalem Times. It was published under New Voices on the internet, but it was from the Jerusalem Times. He said he gave his reason for leaving Israel. I thought it was fascinating. Israel is an enormous play built on ancient fiction. You're basically living in a role someone else wrote. And if you think about the relationship to his father and also all the biblical references, he's still living it. He's still in that world, even though he left.
yeah.
So I thought that was a really good
Right.
handle to understand what he was writing about.
Hi, Elaine.
Anyway,
I had a hard time hearing what you were reading. I'm sorry.
I'll read it again.
Feel loud, loud,
That
loud.
Israel is an enormous play built on ancient fiction. You're basically living a role someone else wrote.
And I think
It's
the
written about the country.
interesting thing about that, and we're gonna talk about it, is the relationship to, it's the, you know, the great generation. And because, you know, his parents were Holocaust survivors and, in the War of Independence, and they did all these, things and got them done, and here we have this story, Pity. Terry.
Well, I had also read that they describe him as a spare stylist whose works explore the moral challenges of military service. And I thought that was really significant because particularly the very, very last line where he hopes, let me just get it. I felt my bladder loosen and all at once with my index finger already searching for the soft trigger spot, I found myself hoping that the man floating in the beam of my gun sight would dash away from me, hoping beyond hope. So as much as earlier in the story, he talks about hatred of Nazis and Arabs, but for the point of this story, Nazis, and yet there's a certain ambivalence, obviously, that he's not sure that he wants to shoot him. And when he had discussed with his father earlier, he would bring him home. And his father said, well, if you have to kill him, you'll kill him. But he said, no, I'm going to bring him home safely. So I feel there's a lot of ambivalence going on within him.
It's quite that ending, it's just, we have Janice, then Judy, then Ellen.
I think on page 448, there's a sentence that is so
448.
relevant to now. Maybe it's in the genes. Now this hatred, like men and snakes, forever and ever, with no forgiveness possible.
Right.
That's exactly what it is.
It's, I did find a lot of, what's the word, resonance to what's happening in the news today. Of this, you know, vicious cycle and how the word Nazi made them crazy. Okay, so then, it's a good thing I wrote this down. Judy, then Ellen.
Okay, on page 447, no pity or compassion for these fuckers, none. And then at the end, it's called pity because pity, and it's
Yeah.
always changed from his father. And so that leads back to your quote about how he's going to change the dynamic.
I
And to
did
me, that
hear
was
that.
the
Yeah.
tipping point.
I was gonna ask, what did you think about pity? Ellen, then Mary.
I forgot to ask my question, which was, what year or so do we think this was referring to, the incident in Paris? The story's first published in 1998. There's a reference to a former slang from the 70s because Golda is mentioned, and it's obviously not then, but I really couldn't figure out the date.
It's the 70s.
Oh, really?
It
Yeah.
is back in the 70s?
I mean, yeah, I mean, that's
Was
what,
based on the father's age. That's what I thought originally, but then I thought, well, maybe it's later when I saw the publication date.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Mary.
The ambivalence. On page 447, there's a really terrific quote. I myself have done 3 abductions in Europe, 1 in Cairo. done with the Nazis. So what? Nazis, Arabs are all the same to me.
Real loud.
Haters of Israel, destroyers of the apple. As the Bible said, it is a mitzvah to persecute them, to exterminate them to the 10th generation, like King Shaul was supposed to do to the Amalekites by the order of God, when he foolishly took pity on his enemy until lost his kingship. And I went and looked it up. I didn't know this story at all. I don't know how it,
Yeah.
but basically it's a story that God told them to eliminate not only them, but all their children, all their livestock, everything. And he refused, and God said, okay, you're done. You can't leave across the Red Sea. And it's an interesting thing, because Dad kind of kept like, how many generations do you have to go? How much do you have to hate? Who should you hate? What do? You keep killing people, or when let go a little bit?
Yeah.
It's all that.
Right. When do you let go of hate? That's a very great question. Susan Wallach.
Okay, so I have a question. How do you explain all the sexual references? Is this how they really behave in the Mossad? I can't tell you what page it is because I read on a Kindle. So, but in the Mossad, fucking is like a handshake. It's a greeting to a colleague. It's even sort of encouraged. So you don't have people falling in love with each other or something, screwing up the operational chain of command. If everyone screws everyone, it doesn't matter anymore. And you can direct your mind to more important stuff. And then it goes on, describing all the fucking that's going on. So how do you explain that?
The minute, yeah. Wait. The minute you said that, I knew exactly what you were talking about, because when I read that, I was like, oh. And listen, obviously this doesn't go to the Haredi in Israel, or the super religious, and that it's generalization. And I don't know, I'm not Israeli, we have to ask one to
Well,
see.
he served.
You're right. Allegedly, but-
I have an answer. to
All right,
that.
Elaine has it real loud, Elaine.
Okay, I think it shows that the dehumanization of the people. If you can just, it's use their word, fuck each other without feelings, and then you can kill someone without feelings, it's the same idea. It just dehumanizes people, and it just shows what the Israel people are, and the Nazis and everyone. It just takes away.
Right. The dehumanization, that's absolutely I never thought about that, but I think you're absolutely right. When I teach Israel and I mentor Israel education, the first thing I say is have to get to know someone's story. Because when you put a face, if people were on the adult enrichment with Jimmy Tabor, and it's the Abraham Initiatives, it was like 2 weeks after the war started, and he works with Arabs and Israelis. And I called him and I said, what are we gonna do for adult enrichment? But he was really totally on point, and we just talked. I thought it was a great session. But he said, when someone in his office who has family in Gaza and they lost 20 people in their family, it makes you go, ugh. And it puts a face on it. So I think Elaine's absolutely right. Dehumanization, obviously Nazis did not think Jews were humans. Alice.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how he really categorized the different Israelis as Moroccan Jews, Ashkenazi Jews, and I think he used other terms. And this is kind of a comment and a question. He mentioned the Moroccan Jews more than once, as they were used, like I think, to guard the Nazis that were captured. And I was thinking that they were used because they weren't as emotionally affected by what the Nazis did during World War II. So they could be not as emotional. But he mentions twice that the Moroccan Jews were used.
I'll tell you why. Moroccan Jews were second-class citizens.
Okay.
That's why they were the guard. And they didn't want to give them the important jobs. And you know, they're Mizrahi, they're, you know, they're not Ashkenazi, like, you know, the head guy was. So that's why they were the guards. And
Okay.
you can literally see it in Israel when you go,
Yes.
because there's Ethiopian Jews, a lot of them are in guard, just in menial jobs, in menial jobs. I think Merle has some great things in the comments. The title raises the question, who deserves pity? It is surprising that their mission is being conducted from a luxury fur boutique in Paris. Yes. What can I say? You're absolutely right there. But I think that's some of the, you know, the juxtaposition of what they're doing and how they're doing it, and, you know, I think like the store, it's because it was, they knew the person in the store across the street. So,
I think they had little.
yeah. Judy,
I think this story unfortunately begs for comparisons with what's happening.
To what?
Gaza.
with what's happening now?
What's happening now? And I had a hard time. I read it twice. On the second read, my mind went into Gaza, Israel, and I had gotten some emails about we should help support Gaza. And I wanted to reply, when you let our hostages go and you get the people who raped, I can be compassionate. The problem is, this points out everyone deserves pity. In my mind, that's how I.
I have Ellen, then Janice. Go, Ellen.
I agree with Judy. I think that, and not just Gaza, I think it reminds us, or is a lesson to us, about all of the, and God knows there's been a lot of it, all of the discussions we have with ourselves or others about prejudice, about you know, just different sects, like Vanessa was saying about that the Moroccans are second-class citizens. They're at least speaking for myself, there is so much hypocrisy about equality and how we've treated Blacks in this country for all these years, and how little progress we've made, and any of the other, you know, different classes. And when is this world ever going to get to really recognizing and celebrating equality? I just spent Sunday night and Sunday night preparing, and all day Monday at the Martin Luther King event in Highland Park, which is so inspirational. But then, you know, you just want to see it really enacted. So I really, I love this story now that the more we're talking about it, in the sense that it just makes you think of all these things. And I would have loved to see this performed. I think it would be a riot. So if it ever comes, we have to make a field trip out of it.
Agreed. Janice.
How about the Leon who didn't want the woman involved?
Oh, right.
And she turned out to be the strength of the operation,
Right.
which would have fallen apart without her.
Absolutely.
Would you repeat that, please?
What about Leon, who didn't want the woman in,
Right.
and she was the strength of the operation? She had brains, brawn, courage,
Oh,
and I think that highlights the Israeli women. And, you know, we've seen a lot of, I believe after this war in Israel, there'll be so many stories, and the trauma. And I just, there's this one woman who was an Israeli, she was just a soldier, but she held off Hamas. And, you know, they all have guns. And even when you see the reunion videos with their kids and they're going into the kids' school, they have their gun with them because they have to keep their gun on them. They're responsible for it, so on and so forth. So it's interesting. Elaine.
Okay, I think that we sitting in our Highland Park bubble are easy to be forgiving and upright. Okay, the people in Gaza who have had everything taken away, the Israelis who have had everything taken away. It is going to continue, this hatred. Maybe it'll be smaller, But it's all well and good, and I certainly am a liberal thinking person. But I have never had anybody come into my home and rape my children or do anything else. And I think it's all wonderful to sit here and say, oh, I have pity for the people. But I understand the ongoing hatred. And when you think about what has happened on both sides, this is going to be something that is going to go on for a long, long time.
Yeah, Meryl said in the, comments, and I'll read it out for us here. Does the final scene remind you of the Keystone Cops? A little bit, yes. The agents seemed too impatient, too trigger happy. Ellen agreed with that. Terry sent me some, research. This is from a bigger, collection called Talking to the Enemy. And each story is incredibly blunt in its depiction of the language and prejudices of a career soldier trained to hate anyone who threatens his people, especially Arabs. Yet he is also a sympathetic character. It's as though the author sets the reader up to dislike his protagonist and then turns the lens back on the reader. This person was impressed with the precision of, unless that was Terry, the precision of Mandelman's language and the depth of emotion he can convey in a very unemotional way. And although there are career soldiers, when you hear some of the things happening in Israel, the soldiers are 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. The reservists coming back in, maybe they're in, up to the 30s. But especially the soldiers, they're babies. And if you think of our 18, 19-year-olds with a gun and trying to decide, do I shoot? Do I let this person through? It's mind-blowing. Alice.
Yeah, this is just adding something to what both Elaine and Ellen said in terms of what the ongoing hatred does to people and how it is ongoing. Many years ago, when I was in Legacy Solel, I took a class from Rabbi Mafik, and he was talking about anti-Semitism, how it keeps changing what it looks like. It's never stopped, and it just like takes on different looks. And then I was listening to, some of you might watch it, the Finding Your Roots show last night, and it was one African-American, it was LeVar Burton and an American Indian man. And anyways, they were talking about how racism keeps changing what it looks like. So I think what I'm trying to say is that, these hatreds continue, and then those of us that are maybe the victims of these hatreds, our hatred then keeps continuing. And so it's like, how do you ever break this cycle?
I believe to break the cycle, you have to tell your story, because if Arabs and Israelis or Germans and whatever it is tell their story, you can't disagree with that. You can't say, Vanessa, you didn't experience that. Yes, I experienced that. And you can't say to no, 20 people in your family didn't die. Yes, they did. And so when we at camp, Peres Rui, we have a lot of Israelis, and please God, we'll have them this summer. I don't know what's going to happen. And when they meet with the liberal American college students, it's sometimes like oil and water. And we really, I call myself the adult, not that these counselors aren't responsible for all the kids who are there, but they're still kids. Most of them all don't have kids. And so, we have to, you have to watch your language, and it's fascinating to see. You can even see their metamorphosis. Last year we had someone, and I didn't realize she was Mizrahi, that she was, not Ashkenazi. And she grew up in a household. And this is before the war, but after the protests. And her father said, Rak Bibi, that means only Bibi, Netanyahu. And after being at camp and seeing the protest, she goes, I realized I need to think about this and that, maybe Rak Bibi is not gonna work. Judy, then Terry.
I think the journalists today are having to suffer with that same struggle because they want to put a face. They have the stories and they don't, and how do they get them out without changing the politics, especially in the year of election?
Right.
So it's true. If you put a face on it, we all have empathy. Can't not have empathy.
Right.
The problem is pity.
Right. And basing a relationship on pity, there's, Terry.
Oh, I listened to a podcast called For Heaven's Sake. I don't know if anyone's familiar with it, but I highly recommend it. It's Daniil Hartman, who's the head of the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, and Yossi Klein Halevi. And
People.
they have an amazing dialogue. They've been doing it even before the war, but since the war, they call it Israel at War. And I've listened to a lot of the episodes. And one of the episodes talked about the fact that in Israel, they're not showing footage of Gaza. And in Gaza, they've never really seen footage of what happened in Israel. And because they haven't been exposed to the actual atrocities, somehow it's harder for them to have pity on the other. And that at some point they're going to be exposed to it, and then perhaps something will open up. But when you're absolutely right, if you're not really putting a face on it and showing the reality, then it's very easy, or it's very difficult to have Rahmanas. You just don't.
Judy just said, is that true? And I'm sure it's true. First of all, in Gaza, I can't even imagine that they have televisions and all of that. And in Israel, there's not that many stations, and it's government controlled, and I'm not surprised. I could check with somebody, and I do think you can get CNN, and I'm sure you can get Fox News. So, sorry, if there's any, what? BBC.
Yeah.
So maybe
Yeah.
you could see it that way, but I think Terry's right. There's something, yes, it hurts everything. And I didn't think we'd be sitting here towards the end of January still talking about it. Who would have thought that? Janice.
You were saying put a face
Yes.
everything. I find this very interesting. I follow a family that's interested online, the Ceylon family.
Uh-huh.
They're Arabs, Muslims, living in Canada. Very modern, with a hijab, but gorgeous, makeup, the whole deal.
Yeah.
She's leaving Canada, and these are the reasons. And if she hurt herself, it applies directly to Jews. She doesn't want her tax money going to Israel. But we don't want our tax money going to Europe.
Right.
She wants her children to live without anti-Muslim feelings. Well, we don't want anti-Semitism. She wants her children to be able to eat more places. Well, but Israel, things are kosher, they can eat.
Right.
They want their children to be able to play freely, and
Right.
it's like you
Yeah.
could realize what she's saying. I think it applies to Jews.
Yeah, I do think that is very interesting. Merle says, does the author even respect the value of the mission to capture Gross, the Nazi? I don't know. I mean, the Mossad has a lot of these. I don't think it's so crazy that the Mossad wouldn't do it, because I just think the Mossad does. And that's why, for me, October 7th, why did the Mossad have the intelligence? Where the hell were they? That to me is like, I just can't imagine it. But this explains a little bit. This is from the New York. This Talking to the Enemy is a collection of story about Israeli sons of those of the men and women, like their American counterparts, they feel inadequate, even though, unlike their American counterparts, they won the 60s war, the Six-Day War, and have been taking care of other business since. The narrator of Pity, for one, is entrusted with the kidnapping of former Nazi named Karl Joachim Gross. At first, he says, after I tracked Gross down in Paris, Menuma, the Mossad's chief, got cold feet and wanted to take me off the case. Then my father intervened and said I was a pro. He had trained me himself. I could handle it, so they let me continue, but they glued Leon Abulafia to me, a Moroccan Jew from Casablanca who knew Nazis only from the movies. The action takes place around 1970. That's why I read that. As they wait for Gross in a dark store across the street from his Paris home, the narrator thinks of his father, the only survivor from his large Lodge family. Lodge is in Poland. There's something a little absurd about chasing Nazis so late in history. Listen, we're still chasing them now. That was, I mean,
Now there are more.
now there's, not just because the world has moved on, but because the Nazis are so old, and they're super old now. When the time finally comes, things go wrong. The narrator is suddenly seized with a dove-like scruples. He's a tough guy, but his father was tougher. And they keep reappearing in the stories. These fathers, even as his sons grow up, kill people, get married, have children. They came from that other planet, as one of the narrators calls the camps, and they are different from you and me. So we can't underestimate that generational feeling in Israel. And I think certainly with Holocaust, the second, third generation here, as well as there. And then we can talk about, people who had, family in the Great World War. Susan, Alice, Elaine.
Well, when you read the very end and realizing that there's pity for everyone, I think he realizes that when he's not going to shoot and not going to kill the guy, that violence just begets more violence. And I think we're learning that with the October 7th thing. The hatred the Israelis have for Hamas, and which then extends to almost all Palestinians, can be understood. The fact and what they're doing now in Gaza is just creating more terrorists, because these young people that have been subject to this are going to grow up with such hatred, and there's just going to be more violence, and violence just begets violence. And I think the author recognized that, and somehow, somewhere, it has to stop. But how? Who knows? I mean, it just seems like there's no way to stop this ongoing hatred that people have for each other when they have been hurt.
A lot of agreement around the table. So, I mean, absolutely. Alice, Elaine, then Judy.
Yeah, I'm just going back to something because I reread something on page 446, the last paragraph before the break, towards the top. I'm disagreeing with you, Vanessa, about the Moroccans, because I think it has to do more kind of what Susan was just saying about hate begets hate. Because what it says towards the end of that paragraph, but they glued Leon Abulafia to me, a Moroccan Jew from Casablanca who knew Nazis only from the movies, from Takamoni High School, and maybe also from Yad Vashem, but that's it. Eichmann too, they had let only Moroccan Jews guard him. I mean, we are all good soldiers and obey orders, but why take chances? I think for me, what that meant was that the Ashkenazi Jews who had parents or grandparents who had perished in the Holocaust or survived horrible things from the Holocaust. They could not be trusted not to kill these people because of the hatred that they had generationally. And so I think that's an important distinction. I think it was not so much that they were lower class citizens, but that they, in a way, could be trusted not to take vengeance on these people. And I think I agree with what Susan was just saying. That's what this story is about, what vengeance does to people. It doesn't, unfortunately, it doesn't do good things.
No.
And when we were in Morocco, we were told that that there was so much more tolerance toward the Moroccan Jews. And I think that adds to your point.
Yeah, yeah.
Elaine, Judy, Mary.
Okay. Number one, I read in the New York Times, and then it was the Tribune, about the group of men that pick up the body pieces
I saw that.
and how they are
That's a
multi-generational,
lot.
and they're really effective. Number two, I have always thought that Israel, who had gone through the Holocaust, and treats their lower class citizens very poorly. Let's forget about October 7th, but we can go back. And there certainly are classes of people that we know. Number three, if you know anybody of my generation, a child of a Holocaust victim, they are a little bit quirky, a little bit off. And you have to have empathy. Now, there is a difference between pity and forgiveness, and pity and guilt. Pity is not necessarily a good thing to have for someone. You need to remember that. I can feel pity is not empathy, okay? And that is paramount in
That's the name of the
story.
game there, yeah. Judy.
On page 455, second sentence. And this mother has pulled back the neck of one of the little kids that was following the Smiler. And he says, madness, madness. One look at a Nazi and we forget everything, everything. Morality is really lost when you are hostile.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's one of the turning points for this young man,
Right.
in my opinion.
Also the adrenaline flowing through their bodies. Mary.
A little deviation. When I read this, I was thinking about being in the military. When you made your comment about being young, well, the people in our military were 18, 19,
Yeah.
20. And so Vietnam, where they used to send the casket back, they stopped that. They will not show
Yes.
people. We do the same thing in our country, but we also do the same thing in our military. And it's no wonder that we sometimes go, why are there so many military supporting Trump? Why were they at the Capitol that day? They were, the police or the military. Well, it's because they have been emotionally cut off. Their empathy is not there, and they're angry. And they're angry because of what they've been through in the horrors that they've seen, or the fighting in the war or whatever.
Yeah.
So we have the same, it's much less. I mean, we
Yeah.
don't look at it that way,
Right.
but I think that's just a human condition
Right.
that we need to be aware of at all times.
Right. I would say, in the Israeli army, not that they've gone to college, but, they're, highly educated and I don't think of our army that way.
No,
It's highly
they're not.
educated.
Our army's the way out in a poor town.
Yeah.
But yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Even going to the military training, my grandfather went to West Point.
Yeah.
The reason he went to West Point, his two brothers went to Dartmouth. His grandfather died when he was 4. His mother got 2 of them through school and didn't have, and this is before World War I.
Yeah.
So there was no safety nets. So
Yeah.
he came along. Where did he go? Well, you're going to get educated. The best place we can send you is
This is the army. Yeah.
right, and he became a general in the army. But it's over time. But anyway, but I think that it is a way out, and they're very young, and they tend not to be as well educated
Yeah.
or have opportunity. And they come out after being in Afghanistan or wherever they go.
Yeah.
It's, it's really horrible. And so they've lost that sense of empathy. And the other thing is that when you hear about all the sexual harassment of women in the military,
Yeah.
and if part of that is the same thing, it's that it's a sex thing here. It happens in our military, and we have fought and fought and fought not to really look at it.
Abby said, we think about Lador Vador and feeling, but most of us can't relate to Lador Vador of military families. Really, I think that it is a different and more intense environment. And Abby, I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And again, in Israel, everyone knows someone in the army. And after October 7th, everyone knows someone who has died or, severely injured. And my girlfriend's daughter is there, and she said, for a while it was funeral after funeral, because again, we know that in Jewish ritual, you're to bury as soon as you can. And I remember them interviewing and seeing it here on CNN that they had to use dental records. I mean, from the but from the music festival. So all of that was absolutely terrible. And I believe the trauma, we haven't begun to see what's going to happen with this trauma.
Talking about trauma, we think about the soldiers that killed those 3 hostages, the adrenaline running in them, and the guilt and the ruins of everyone's lives.
Yes.
Because they did this.
Right.
But they're young, and all of the things we can't imagine.
We can't imagine. Getting back to the story, Merle says the presence of children at the end should have made them abort the mission in the final scene. Agreed. Isn't this reminiscent of what is going on now? Right. It's madness. Madness. Alice and then Terry.
Yeah, this is just adding something to what Mary and you just said, Vanessa. We have a relative who has family in Israel, and we just saw him, and he was saying that I think it's either a nephew or a grandnephew is in a program in Israel where he's in the army part of the time and he's yeshiva part of the time. And so I think he said he was 19 years old. And when the war started, what was he assigned? He was assigned to take care of the dead Israeli people. That's what he was assigned. So, I mean, so how does that affect a 19-year-old? This is what your assignment is, to take care of the body.
And he's not assigned to like 1 or 2, it was thousands.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You can't even imagine how that affects a 19-year-old going forward. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry, Terry, go ahead.
You know what, there was one more quote from what I had sent you that I think is interesting. This is a quote from Mandelman. He talks about how his work is influenced by Nabokov, Plutarch, Gogol, Wow, and P.G. Wodehouse. He says, I write against the grain, trying to prove myself wrong, then shape the result so as to keep the reader hooked. And I aim at 2 things only: that once you start reading, you could not stop, and that once you finish, you could not forget it. Therefore, the running theme in all my stories is necessary evil. It is a strongly agitating theme and leads, when shaped correctly, to both irresistibility and unforgettability. That's it. So.
But you skipped the most important sentence.
Uh-oh.
So that my stories survive. That was
I didn't see that. Aha. But my stories survive. You're right.
And there's the whole survival thing is obviously it's a theme. It's a theme. So. Uh, Okay. Yeah,
That I didn't stop. Once I started, I couldn't stop reading. It
yes.
was that fast.
Yeah. In the New York, Mandelman is himself from the generation of the Sons. His bio states that he served in the Israeli Air Force during the Six-Day War. No, that getting into the Air Force it's not easy, just like you would expect it to be, and I'm sure it's like that in the States. In Israel, as you get ready to go to the army, there's a profile, and they add up all the numbers of your intelligence, your physical strength, and you have to have a high profile to get into the Air Force. And of course, they were very successful during the Six-Day War. He has been living in the US and Canada for a while now, and he writes in English. That's fascinating. Sometimes he sounds a little shticky, purposely inverting syntax. After his second wife died also from cancer. So, like he knows how Jews are supposed to sound in this language. And he is a cruder writer. Now, I guess I don't agree with, because I think Nathan Englander is very crude. David Bezmoji, I've read some stuff, and Todd Hassak Lowy, I've read some stuff. All of whose stories have dealt impressively with contemporary Jewish men, aren't quite the mentions of the Jewish past. But Mandelman's material is richer, and he tells it with more urgency. And I do think there is an urgency there. And being of the generation, I think his parents are, Holocaust survivors. And that's what the narrator is here. That just affects you. It affects, your life. And on May 5th, it's Erev Yom HaShoah, and we have a survivor. I thank Jim Schuster, a congregant who has worked with the Holocaust Foundation in Skokie. And he and I, have talked about this, the survivors, obviously. He and I have been doing this for, I don't know, I want to say about 20 years, and I've been doing it for about probably 30 years of bringing survivors in. And when I see the death of someone that I brought in, it's like, oh, we heard, him, and we heard that one, and we heard this one. But Jim and I have talked about what's going to happen when there aren't any more, and you have to go to the second, And we've brought in some people, who are either the kinder transport, or they were taken to England or other cases. And someone might have said, well, you weren't a survivor if you, weren't in the camps. And I profoundly disagree with that. Yeah. So, well, again, the stories have it's the tip of the iceberg. And obviously, it'll be absolutely fascinating to see how the creative community deals with October 7th.
I think they're struggling right now.
I'm sure they're
tremendously,
yes.
because and I think President Biden is struggling in how he shows this, because he is, let's not kid ourselves, up for re-election.
Yeah.
And that is.
I thought you were gonna say, don't kid ourselves, he's from that generation
Right,
of, World War,
But he is.
But he is.
I know he is.
Okay, but beyond that, he is seeking re-election.
Yeah.
And the Jewish community has historically voted Democratic.
Yes.
The Muslim community prior to the last few years have historically voted.
Yeah.
And so he needs desperately those votes. And how do you balance your empathy, not
Yeah.
pity,
Empathy.
for each group without alienating the other group?
Can I make a vote?
Sure.
I think he's in vice. He is in. And
Stop
second,
Biden.
yes, and secondly, he really is, really is a problem for him because he has to, he need, for Israel to survive, which is our foreign policy. He's going
Yes.
by foreign policy.
Yes.
He is not doing the political thing right now, which I really admire, because he isn't. He's going, we are shoulder to shoulder.
Right.
In the background, he's going, baby, come on.
Yeah,
But he can't swerve from where we are at, and yet he'll lose a chunk of his electorate.
Yes.
And really,
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
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 they're recruiting him, oh,
because
absolutely.
Trump has shown that he is for Israel. And they believe some of the gobbledygook that he said. Yes, they are going to vote. The blacks have voted, the Hispanics have won. Let's not even get.
Yeah, we can't get,
Yeah,
we
but
can't get there.
I'm just saying, it's
Right.
a really tricky thing, and
It is all tricky.
and it,
And, right, Merle wants to know, what do you take away from the story? Good intentions that go wrong? Party Lane, what do you think?
I think he just sort of panicked at the end and was terribly confused with what his father wanted, what he wanted, and just because he was so confused, froze and did nothing.
Judy?
I think it was an epiphany. I think we are epiphanies now again, and this was his.
the interesting thing is, he said, if he runs away, please run away. I think he's going to kill him.
I think he's going to.
Absolutely, that he really isn't, but it's a frozen moment, but he's going to act, and we don't know what's gonna happen. And I think that's one of the great things about the story is that
Right.
this is true in life too. We don't know. We have the moment, but.
Right. And, I would challenge Merle with good intentions is that, to kill someone, I mean, can that be good? Even if he went or maybe the good intentions were that he was trying to capture him. And you do have, I mean, Eichmann is the most famous, one that I can think of that they captured him. Buenos Aires and, got him to Israel, and it's all those things that are like now in the national consciousness. When you say glass booth,
Yeah.
you know that that's Eichmann. So, and these guys are trying to live up to that, and
But they still would kill him in the end. It's a,
who, Eichmann?
no.
Oh, these guys.
Because if he goes to trial, they're
Yes.
gonna prove that he was a Nazi and they're gonna
Right.
kill him anyway.
Although I think Eichmann was the only one who got capital punishment. I'd have to Google that quickly, but
Okay, I don't.
I don't think that they, I don't know what they did with all the Nazis. And of course, some of them have been prosecuted here and in Germany and in the Hague. And so, we talk about there's no more Holocaust survivors. I mean, eventually,
They died off.
they died off. They died off. We
That's why
can't,
we have to study history, we have to keep talking about it.
we have to study history and we have to keep talking about it. My dad was very philanthropic and he liked them giving money to the Simon Wiesenthal Center because they tracked down. Yes. And my dad, too young to fight in World War II, but he felt very strongly. All right, our next story is David Minion. And my calendar.
Will it be summer?
Yes, yes, Elaine, it will be summer.
Okay.
On,
Okay.
on February 7th.
Yes.
Yeah, I will not be here.
And I will tell everybody here, we're starting a lunch and learn, and there's a lunch and learn on that day. So you could double dip and stay all morning with us. But it's all coming out,
Doing the luncheon.
Rabbi and me, and we're talking about Israel.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting.
Rabbi Ike.
Okay.
And Rabbi Evan is doing a Thursday night something on on the writings of Rabbi David Ellison, who just passed away. So that should also be. Sharon, get your hand up.
You know what, if you're ready to go, I don't need to, I just wanted to throw that out there because I thought it was curious how much he hated the French. And we didn't really talk about that. He went
That's
great
true.
detail about how horrible the French were and how they collaborated with the Nazis. And I wondered what you all thought that added to the story. So that was my thought.
I mean, we know about the Vichy, we know about, there's a lot of stories that have come out a little bit more recently, including the book I Hated Sarah's Key, but that does tell the story of Jews who had and put into that, bicycle stadium. Wait, somebody had their hand up.
I did.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of answering what do we take from the story, and I think to what Terry said, I really walk away with the author kind of having an indictment on the procedures for catching these people. I mean, obviously, I don't know. I think when there's so much secrecy and all this, there would be so nice if it could be done in a United Nations authorized way and a United Nations that we could believe in. Right now, we're not. The Hague Justice Center is certainly not on our good our good track. But anyway, there's so much of what he did to me was satirical, you know, or that I think I come away with feeling that it's an indictment on those procedures. So,
Abby, last word. Wait, I'll unmute you. Go ahead, I unmuted you.
The very, very last line has something to say about what we have control over and what we don't have control over. In terms of the whole thing with his bodily function and what was between, you know, the gun and so on and so forth. And so much is just a fine line too.
right.
You're absolutely right. What we have control over. Yikes. Yeah.
Great discussion. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
I agree.
Yes, I'll put it in. Yes, that's agreed. Thank you. All right, thanks, everybody. It was great to see you. I hope everybody liked the new setup. And when it warms up, maybe we'll see more people in person, but I think we've got it. All right.
Nice. Bye-bye. Thank you.